These are the old World War II gun turrets at Arnish Point. It's really windy today, by the way, really stormy. This bit here is the gun mount. They just chopped it off with a welding torch or something, all rough. These guns used to point out towards the entrance to the Stornoway Bay here. They never fired a shot in anger, I'm pretty sure of that. In 1985, I was getting ready to go to a friend's wedding dance. I was looking in the mirror, straightening out my tie, when a thought suddenly entered my head out of the blue. I had the kind of thought that this had never happened before, this kind of thing, where a message came with power, just entered my mind. And it was basically this, that it wasn't in the form of words, it was just an understanding, a knowledge, a realization that what I was intending to do that night was against God's will, that it was sinful, you know, wine, women and song and all that, and just turning my back on eternity, on God, ignoring God, as we all do by nature. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I remember wondering, where did that come from? And it didn't interest me at all. It really wasn't what I wanted, so I just cast it aside and forgot about it and went out and had a night of it on the town and all that, you know, at the wedding dance particularly. Anyway, afterwards, me and my brother, we got into a fight with some enemies that we had at the time. And we got the better of them, to put it bluntly. And we thought that this was quite entertaining, well, we were happy about it, shall we say. And we went home. We walked home. We thought it was strange that there were a couple of the girlfriends of these people were following us up the road and saying strange things from behind us. There were some distance behind us shouting things like, "You're going to die," and things like that. Well, we were just ignoring them. But anyway, when we arrived at the house, two of these blokes were waiting at the house for us. And a fight started, and I ended up getting stabbed. And I really believed I was dying. I thought I would definitely be dead within 5 minutes. I felt that I was sliding into hell, and that there was nothing that I could do about it. All I could see before me was the blackness of darkness forever. A terrifying, horrible prospect. But the one emotion which I remember clearly, which was much stronger than any other one at the time, was one of sheer anger at how stupid I had been. disregarding eternity, disregarding God, ignoring God, and just careering through my life in such a stupid manner. So there was, by this time I'd slid down, and I was onto the ground. I was sitting on the ground. I'd slid down the side of this wall, kind of, that I'd been outside the house. It actually happened at the front of my house. Would you believe it? And I was sitting there. My breaths were becoming shorter. I'd been stabbed in the chest, the left side of my chest. In fact, it had collapsed my left lung. My breaths were getting shorter, and the pain was increasing, and I was becoming weaker. I was just feeling that I was getting weaker, and I really believed I was dying. And I was sure I would be dead in no time at all. But then a police car arrived. One single policeman, and he came out, and when I saw him, I thought, oh, well, I'll say something to this policeman. And I stood up, and I was wearing a white shirt, and all this blood was all over the shirt. And I remember saying to him, I've been stabbed. And he went in a bit of a kind of panic mode and hurled me into the back of the car and drove the vehicle. This was what they had in those days was what we used to call a jam sandwich, a Mark 405 Cortina with a big red stripe along the side, each side. And he was going sideways around every corner like a crazy rally driver. And really going at a high speed, traveling at a high speed. And I remember saying to him, hey, I want to get to the hospital. Anyway, when I got to the hospital, they put me on the emergency table and started carrying out their procedures. It was pretty horrible. I remember they had to make another hole in my chest. They gave me a quick local anaesthetic and made another hole in my chest to insert a drain tube into the chest cavity to reinflate the lung and so on. And it was a clear tube, and I remember all this blood squirting down the tube. It was a coiled tube. Oh man, felt horrible and looked horrible. And after a while, though, it dawned on me, oh, I'm still alive. And I began to think, I'm not going to die. I've got a second chance. That God had given me a second chance. And I made the conscious decision at that time to begin a habit of praying on a daily basis. But what I was going to pray for was, I was afraid of death. Not death in and of itself, but what would come after death. Hell for eternity. Cast into outer darkness. Lost forevermore. The prospect of that terrified me. But I had no appetite for God Himself. I had no appetite for being a holy woolly as I saw it. Didn't appeal to me. So I prayed on a daily basis from that point on for God to protect me, to put it one way, to save me from dying, something like that, to preserve me. Though I didn't have the guts, the courage to ask for God Himself, which is, of course, the one thing we must ask for. So I never did ask for that. And the years were passing, and I joined the army in '88 and spent my entire time through basic training, as usual, praying. This was secret between me and God. Nobody else knew. Every evening I would go to bed and I would pray in that similar way for preservation and so on. And I remember at the end of basic training, and that it would help me through the training and things. Because, sometimes in basic training in the military, you get discouraged and so on. But anyway, at the end of basic training, now I don't want to sound like I'm boasting here, but one of the PTIs took me aside and he said to me, you know, I won one of the prizes. There was 3 prizes available: best recruit, best at PT, and best shot. And I won best shot. But anyway, this PTI took me aside at the end of basic training and he told me, he said, you were considered for all 3 prizes. And the only reason you didn't get all 3 prizes was because, you know, that my name had been put forward for all 3. And the only reason you didn't get all 3 prizes was because Sergeant Jameson didn't believe that any single recruit should get more than 1 prize. And the one thought that came to me clearly at that point, the one thought that was impressed upon my mind strongly was how God had answered my prayers, how that was proof, evidence of God answering my prayers. And it was as if he'd made the PTI take me aside to tell me that, to impress this upon me. Look, I've been answering your prayers. The things you've been asking for, help to get through the basic training and things. So that was good. When I was in Belfast after that, I remember I used to, I'd be out in patrol, and you know, there was a risk because you were exposed running about on patrol in uniform and so on. You were a big target all the time. I mean, I used to pass bullet holes in walls and things where soldiers had been shot at and so on, things like that. So that would compel me to pray while every time I went out and patrol and things, pray all the more. Anyway, when I finished basic training, I was posted to Germany. You know, the thing is, when I joined the army, I wasn't interested in being a soldier. I didn't join the army to be a soldier. I actually joined the army to be a photographer, because I had learned that in the Queen's Own Highlanders, they had most regiments have a photography department. Well, the Queen's Own Highlanders had a photography department. And I joined with the intention of getting some kind of role in the photography department, because I was interested in photography. Well, when I arrived in Germany, not long, very shortly after I arrived in Germany, I was just a brand new, what they called a frog. They would term you a frog if you were a new guy. And I remember an old PSI of mine who was back at the regiment. A PSI is a permanent, what they call a permanent staff or instructor, which is somebody who's a regular soldier, a colour sergeant, but he's transferred to the TA for a couple of years to run the TA, and he had been running the TA in Stornoway when I had been in the TA previously. And anyway, he met me and he said, I want you for the anti-tank platoon. He was the 2IC of the anti-tank platoon at the time. And I said, well, I don't want to join the anti-tank platoon. And he said, why not? And I said, I told him because I wanted to be a photographer. And he just bluntly told me, there's no chance you'll get that. No way in a million years you'll get that. You have to have been in the army for a lot of years, and you have to be at least a corporal, and all this kind of stuff. And I just thought, well, I just shrugged and didn't really. I heard him, but that was that. Anyway, so sometime after that, I was the regiment was out on exercise at a place called Soltau, which is a big training area in Germany, massive training area for tanks and troops and so on. And I had an injury at that point. I'd injured my back, So I was on a thing something called light duties, whereby everyone else would go out digging trenches and all that, and the freezing cold. It was winter time, and they'd be sitting there in the snow and trenches and things, and I was in this Nissen hut. And would you believe it, the job they gave me to do was watching 8 company weapons, all these weapons on the floor of this Nissen hut, and I was sitting on a camp bed on my own, watching these weapons, and I would have to go over to the cookhouse in this big. I was in this sort of this camp. There was a camp with buildings on this exercise area, serving the exercise area. So I was in this camp, while all the rest of them were out in the cuds, and I would have to go over to the cookhouse every so often for my meals. And at one point I was over there frying my breakfast. You know, the chef, the cooks would just say, "Oh, cook it yourself," you know. So, because I was on my own, so I'd cook it, and they'd sit there playing cards and smoking and all that. Anyway, while I was cooking my breakfast, in came the commanding officer of the regiment and the second in command. So the CO and the 2 IC. And when they saw me, which is as their wont was, they came straight up and asked me the perennial question, the question that they ask of every soldier that they bump into when they don't know what he's up to. "What are you on?" That's "what are you on?" "What are you on?" And I said, "Oh, watching 8 company weapons, sir." And he said, the CO that is, he said, is there nothing better than that you could, more useful, that is there nothing more useful than that you could do?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir, as a matter of fact, there is." So I then explained to him how I was a photographer and so on. "Ooh," and he turned around to the 2 IC. "Ooh, well, imagine that," or however he put it. The battalion photographer, it just so happens he's Corporal Patience, he's leaving the job. He's going to the officers' mess, and we're looking for a photographer. Oh, well, I'm your man, I thought to myself. And anyway, right from that moment on, my feet didn't touch the ground, and I was immediately ushered into the battalion photographer's job. So the thing worked around to in a way that I just wouldn't have dreamt of. And I was in that job really shortly after the Ginger Laughlin 2 IC of the anti-tank platoon and my old PSI had emphatically stated that there was no chance I would get a job in the photography department, well, or as battalion photographer. I wasn't even looking for a job as a battalion photographer. I was wanted to get some role in the department. But anyway, I ended up being made the only battalion photographer, and I had my own darkroom, my own office kind of thing with a key and all that. And it just emphasized again that God was answering my prayers. So what you have to do is you have to pray to God. Now, if you don't believe in God, that's all very well, right? But you're making an assumption there. You don't know whether God exists or not. My problem was always that. Does he exist or not? Does God exist or not? That was always my problem. So it was logical to be scientific about the matter and not just make assumptions and assume that God doesn't exist, like an idiot, like a fool. Oh, God doesn't exist. You don't want him to exist, so therefore he doesn't exist. Ridiculous. No, be scientific, be logical. Ask him. If he's there, you can ask him to reveal himself in some way, right? But I'm sure you would appreciate his help in life, would you not? So, do this. Simply begin a habit of asking God to guide you through life, to help you through life, to ultimately, over and above everything else, to show you the truth, to guide you to the true path to salvation. The true path of salvation. That's the most important thing to ask for, that He would guide you to find Him. But if you don't want to find Him, now that was what I was always afraid to do, yeah. But if you don't want Him to, if you don't feel you want to be born again, now of course that's wrong to feel like that, right? But you can't make somebody want something that they don't want, if you know what I mean, right? But look, if you want God's help in your life, ask for it. And I think you may well be surprised at the outcome. What a wild day, I tell you, it's really wild. But my experience was that I was asking for God's help, asking for all these worldly help in worldly matters, and I could only conclude that He was helping me. But of course, I was too afraid to ask for Himself. But to ask for salvation, to be born again, to become a Christian. Like I said, being holy willy just didn't appeal. But the difference is, well, you're looking at it from one side of the fence there, but when you're born again, then you're seeing it from the other side, and you're blind. Before that happens, you're totally blind to these things. And when I was finally born again, when he finally did change me, come with power and change me from being an unbeliever, from being a non-Christian to a Christian, someone who knew God, from someone who did not know God to someone who did know God. Suddenly I was looking at it from the other side of the fence, from the other point of view, and it was so completely different, and I could never have imagined it. And I just found myself saying, I would never have believed it. I would never have believed it. I realized how clueless and blind I had been the whole time, even though I was praying and asking God for things. So you can ask God for things. As a non-Christian, you can ask Him for help, and He'll give you help, and He'll even make it clear to you that He's giving you help. But ultimately, my experience was that there was a certain kind of indebtedness building up that you were becoming aware of in a strange way, which built up until it got to the point where He would bring you to a place where you would actually feel the need to ask for the one thing needful, the one truly important thing, which is salvation. I mean, for instance, I remember I came home on leave. I had a motorbike at this time. This was after my tour in Belfast, and you spent a few months there, best part of about 6 months, and you would build up all your wages, and then when you got your leave at the end of the Belfast tour, Northern Ireland tour, you had built up some money. So I bought a motorbike and came back to Stornoway on leave, and then the first Gulf War started, and I didn't want to go. I had a bad attitude in those days. I wasn't converted at this point, by the way. It was after I got out of the army I was converted. But at this time I had a bad attitude, and I really wasn't interested. I was so tired of the army, so sick of the horrible army attitude that so many people in the military have, especially senior ranks, NCOs. Oh, what a grim time they were giving me, I tell you. Locking me up, throwing me in jail, just because they were so angry at me. My platoon sergeant at one point had me by the throat up against the wall, saying, you've gone over, just because the CO had given me that job, the battalion photographer job. You've annoyed a lot of people. You've gone over a lot of people's heads and all this. Had me up against the wall by the throat, and so on. And other senior ranks would be messing me around badly because I was still a private, messing me around badly and in all sorts of ways, throwing me in jail and everything. But anyway, this time I'd ended up in Stornoway. I was in Stornoway with my motorbike, having a great time. Smoking dope and wine, women and song and all that stuff. And then the first Gulf War started. This is late 1990. And I really didn't want to go. I wasn't interested. And so I started playing I did actually have, my sore back had reoccurred and was bothering me. So I'd gone to the doctor with it. I was, at one point I was literally stuck in bed. I couldn't even get out of bed. It was so painful. And I remember I went to the doctor and I got a sick chit that I couldn't travel and so on. And I got better after a bit, but I decided I was going to start playing on it because I was enjoying myself too much. I didn't want to go back, and I wasn't interested in going to a war either. So I started getting these sick chits from the doctor, and I would be, extending my stay at home, extending it, and so on. Anyway, one day the phone rang, and it was this certain sergeant in Germany, a Sergeant Curran, and he told me that I had to come back to Germany right away. And I wasn't interested, and I told him, I was trying to explain to him how I was injured, I couldn't travel and so on. And he just told me to get my effing backside back over there right away. And I stupidly told him where to go. And something along the lines of F off, and hung up the phone. Oh, massive, massive mistake. If I'd only known then what I know now. Within an hour, the police were at the door, arrested me, took me to the cells, locked me up, kept me in the cells until a couple of RPs were sent up from Redford Barracks in Edinburgh to take me, handcuff me, and take me with them on the plane down to Redford Barracks, where I was locked up in the guard room for some weeks before I was shipped back over to Germany again, charged with being AWOL and so on. And I spent some time in one of the army jails in Germany, a guard room in one of the camps or something. I can't. Anyway, and then I was brought to stand before the adjutant of my regiment, who started yelling at me, accusing me of having a yellow streak down my back, and that I was such a coward and all this kind of stuff. And by this time, I had long since become, I'd accepted the fact that I was going to go to war. Fine, I was fine with it. I was okay with it. I mean, what's the problem? But he didn't know. He couldn't read my mind, but thought I was a coward. He was calling me a coward, and I was standing there thinking to myself, yeah, well, you've got no idea, mate. I don't mind going to war. I'm okay with that now. Might get some good photos, and all this kind of daftness. But I was okay with going to war at that point, no problem at all. I'd acknowledged the thing. I was okay with it. And so anyway, though, what happened after that was I found myself sitting in a car one evening with my friend Roddy McLeod, who was also heading off to, we were all doing training for going to the Gulf. And by this time I had discovered that I didn't have to go because of when I had joined the army. I'd only signed on for 3 years, and my liberation date was coming up in a couple of months, and they couldn't send me. They weren't going to send me if I was leaving. After all, they weren't going to send me because I would be leaving. But I could sign on and extend my stay in the army if I wanted to, and I considered it because I thought that it might be a good experience and I would get some good photos over there. And I remember saying that to Roddy, and Roddy said he clearly wasn't happy at all. I don't think he was happy at all about going to war. He didn't look happy, but he said to me, "You don't want to go to war." When I'd said that to him, I told him, "Well, I think I might go. I think I might just sign on and go because I'll probably get some good photos over there." And all he said was, "You don't want to go to war." And he looked pretty depressed about the fact that he was going. So then, okay then, I thought, yeah, okay, I'll accept that. I'll take that advice then. And that was it. And I decided I wasn't going to go after all. And the regiment went off to the Gulf, and I left the army. And it was the interesting thing was, before I left the army, I remember I was on guard duty just before I went back home, and I was trying to make some kind of silly deal with God, saying to him that I would be, as if I would become a Christian, if he would just, I'll put it off. I'll put off becoming a Christian just now for the time, because I thought it was too difficult at the time to do it, or for some reason, because I was still in the army or something, that somehow got in the way of becoming a Christian, which was very silly. And I thought that I could say to God, oh, can you wait till I'm out of the army and then I'll become a Christian? Because I didn't understand in my naivety that you cannot become a Christian. You cannot become a Christian. You don't just go snap your fingers, oh, I think I'll be a Christian. That is not how it works. Only God can make you a Christian, and it's about asking. And it happens in His time, and you have to ask, and you cannot summon Him. You cannot snap your fingers for Him. You cannot become a Christian whenever you feel like it. It doesn't work like that. It's about mercy. It's about Him giving you repentance. And you then asking for mercy, and Him, the dispenser of the mercy, the giver of mercy, the giver of life, the one who has the keys to the kingdom of heaven. It's down to His power, what He does, what He can do, not what we can do. Our role is to ask. His role is to give in His time and leave it to Him. Well, that's all you can do. If you're wise, you'll know it. I wasn't prepared to accept anything except the real thing. I was never going to say I was a Christian until I knew I was a Christian, and the only way I could know was to get it directly from God. So after I left the army, what actually happened was, and surprise, surprise, I forgot all about becoming a Christian and decided to just have a party the whole time. And that's what I did. So there I was, indulging in wine, woman, and song, and just being a fool. And I was thoroughly enjoying myself for some time. Until Penny, come on, Penny, come here. Hi. They do know each other, yeah. They do. Hey, stop. She's quite grumpy with him though, I'm afraid.
He deserves it.
Eh?
He deserves it.
So where was I? In the midst of all of this, enjoying myself with the sinful pleasures of life, the debauched pleasures of life. God simply removed the enjoyment, the pleasures. The pleasure was gone. And the more I indulged in these things, the more miserable I became. No matter how hard I tried, I no longer got any pleasure from any of this. And I started feeling even bordering on suicidal at times. I mean, temptations to, end my life were even cropping up. Oh, it was really miserable. So God, at that time, convicted me of my sin. To cut a long story short, convicted me of my sin. And enabled me to ask and really mean it. He gave me repentance, in other words. It's not something that we can, like I said, drum up in ourselves. We can't just drum it up. So, He convicts you of your sin, and you then cry out in need. You're then able to cry out truly in need and mean it. And He cannot deny you. After all, He's the one that gave you that repentance. He's the one that caused you to feel the need, to feel the sinner that you truly are. He impresses this upon you in a miraculous, supernatural way. And then when He does give you Himself, there is no mistaking it. There is no mistake. There's no doubt. You know it. It's clear. The most important experience, the best experience that you can possibly have in this world. The most amazing experience. The power of God, the miraculous power of God, delivering you from darkness to light. And you taste of the supernatural joy of God, which is beyond words. It cannot be explained. It can only be experienced to be known. And once you experience it, you can never lose it. Once you've been given it, you have it forever. Seek it. If you're wise, you'll seek it.